Hi, this screencast is going to support you using Seesaw as a way to export instruction to your students. So let's go ahead and get started in Seesaw. I am going to hit the plus add feature and the plus assign activity feature. Basically what you're going to do is create an activity, and that is going to be the instruction. So let's talk about a little bit more about what that means. Create activity. I hope there's not a lot of background noise. The create activity is on the far left hand side, where it says in blue, create new activity. You will only have that feature in the My Library. So if the top where it says community, school and district, and My Library, if you were to go between those three, you are only going to get the feature of create new activity under My Library. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to go ahead and do a math lesson. I'm actually going to call it math fraction lesson 1. I'm going to just do a model of second grade fraction lesson 1 in chapter 12, just parts of it for the purpose of this screencast. So the instructions for students would just be click on the video to hear today's lesson. You could add voice instructions if you want, but if I get rid of the keyboard, the very next thing you want to click on is under the bottom where it says student template. Click add student template for student responses. Don't panic. All this is we're going to get to that blank draw white screen, that feature you have in Seesaw. I'm not going to actually upload anything. You can, but let's just kind of use the basics for the purpose of this screencast. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the drawing. Okay, so you'll see here the normal regular Seesaw screen, and now to shift our thinking from what we want students to create and what we want students to share with us, we're going to think to ourselves, how can we use this blank drawing canvas basically as our new whiteboard. So two features I want to draw your attention to, one of which you're very familiar with is, let me make sure my Apple Pen is working. Sorry, it's kind of, let's see. I apologize for the technological delay. I'm going to use my finger in the meantime. You have your microphone, and that will give us the option of recording instruction to students. But you also have over here these different page options, and all that does is it gives you an additional page, a new screen basically. But what's nice about this for the purpose of instruction is every time you click record, you get 5 minutes of screencast time on one screen. You may not need all 5, but if you wanted more than 5, the way to get around that is you would hit add a page, and then you have a new page. And then each page, then you would have an opportunity to record an additional 5 minutes. So as this is set up right now, I could get 10 minutes of instruction out. So let's go ahead and just kind of get started with what that could look like. Let me erase all of my, erase my arrows and show you how this could look for students. Just some background information that I didn't consider before I began this the screencast for students was I thought, all right, if I'm doing fractions, second grade, I'm going to want to bring up some shapes. So that's when I wanted to get my screen ready before I hit record for students. So I knew, all right, let's just use a rectangle. We could even use a square. I just wanted to get these things sort of set up. But knowing it's much easier to divide things into equal parts with a grid behind it, I'm going to hit the background feature. I mean, I could do the dot paper or I could do array. I'm just going to stick, or the grid paper. I'm going to stick with this. I'm just going to kind of line it up nicely so that way, I don't know, it's a little bit nicer for the instruction. So the way you'd get started with this is you would go over to the record button, to engage the pen at the bottom, just to kind of show you where that's at. I'm going to hit record. It's going to count me down. All right, I'm just going to erase that. All right, good morning, boys and girls. Today's lesson is on a new unit called fractions, and a lot of us have actually interacted with fractions, and many times you just may not have realized it, even thinking back to our bar models unit. So today we're just going to start small and start slow with this and look at a couple of different shapes and think about what are fractions. What does that even mean? So if I were to look at my square over here, I could actually divide it up into a couple of different pieces, equal pieces. If I divided it that way, I would have two pieces. And notice how they are both equal of each other, right? Well, this one's a little bit smaller. Maybe I would. I'm going to double check the size of this shape. I'm going to shore it up a little bit. So that way my halfway point is truly a halfway point. And then show them, all right, well, since I've divided it here in the middle, I can see this is part 1 and this is part 2, which tells me this shape is out of 2 whole pieces. And a lot of the times, if we were to refer to one of them, I would call that 1/2. And a lot of you have used this term 1/2 and talked about it, but really seeing it here, this is what it's referring to. Half of this whole shape. So we're going to talk to that. And it could be written as this, 1/2, because the 2 refers to the 2 parts. The 1 refers to this, the 2 parts, that is. The 1 is just one of those 2 parts. A way that could look in a way that isn't correct would be if maybe you drew your line this way. Or maybe how kind of similar to what we had been doing when we were doing vertical lines, maybe it was a little bit down here. Notice how these are not 2 equal size shapes. This one is much larger. And just as a little side note for those of you listening, what I'm trying to keep doing is mark on the screen as much as possible. While the tapping on the screen is a little bit, there's a sound there, and I know it could sound a little bit annoying. The point of it is really to keep the students grounded in what you're referring to at all times and keeping them visually engaged. So each time I'm tapping and just even drawing an arrow, drawing that line, and maybe I'm putting a dot in it to say what I'm referring to, it's really giving them a visual cue to stay engaged and hooked with what you're talking about. So if I was to continue with this lesson, I would go through, naming it, shading some in. Maybe I could even go all the way down and make this shape, make that shape invisible. I don't really want it to be invisible, however, but you could go ahead and, add some different features to it, layer the different pieces of instruction to it. All the while, when I'm instructing, I would be keeping an eye on my time. And notice that's up here. The time bar will start flashing a little bit for you at 4 minutes and 30 seconds to say it's time to kind of wrap it up. But maybe you wanted to continue your instruction. Remember, you do have to kind of say goodbye to this screen. You would have to recreate anything or just start fresh. But I'm going to hit done up in the right-hand corner and show you how, if you wanted to move on to another page and keep the instruction going past 5 minutes, what that would look like. So I'm going to hit done. And then I'm going to go down to my second page. Notice how it's highlighted in blue. The screen becomes blank once again. And maybe before I just automatically hit record, I'm going to take some time to set the page up just like I did before. Get my grid back. Maybe I'll bring up, just to keep it the same type of thing for students, maybe I'll keep the same shapes as well. And then we could even possibly this time talk about how you could draw and shade in 1/2. So first the first part of this lesson was naming those different pieces and talking about how they're equal parts. Maybe I want to use this, take this circle shape, and I'm going to bring it down to white. Although that is a little bit, maybe I'll keep it sort of a light gray and they can still visibly see it. But I'm going to give them an option to do something I have planned for their practice later. But I'm going to go ahead and leave these 2 things ready to go for the instruction I have prepared for the next page. So I'm going to go ahead and hit record once more. It's going to count me down. So boys and girls, we're going to continue looking at our shapes to think about how we could shade in those fraction pieces. What does that really mean to say I would like to shade in half of the circle, for example? So if I were to take a look, I'm going to kind of maybe just look at use my marker. And if I know that half, I'm going to use this line right here. Notice how it gives me that visual. That's not what I thought it would be, to be honest. I was thinking it would be much slimmer. I'm going to erase that. That's not really what I was looking for. I'm going to draw a nice thin line, but then I might coach the students to say, you know, one of the tasks that we're going to do, I'm going to use the marker instead. One of the tasks you'll be doing this unit is shading in 1/2, and that'll show us that you know what a half is. So I'm just going to kind of go through there, and then I can still see the half green line. I know I've colored over the line a little bit with students. I would just be honest and frank to say that it's close enough to know that that's what we were trying to achieve. And maybe I would even show them an example of what isn't correct, and draw another circle and show it being, you know, maybe more closer to 2/3 and how that isn't an example. And I could do the same with the square. But again, what I've done with this, adding the second page on the screencast, is I've allowed myself an additional 5 minutes of instruction time. And another, just a side note for instruction purposes, is I have the Math Think Central website up on my Mac as I have my iPad going. So I'm just scrolling through the 3 different learns on the MacBook, and I'm using the learns, all of the examples. They had an example talking about a muffin. I don't really have a muffin, so maybe I would just use a square or a different shape to approach the same concept. But really, it's not me making up a whole new lesson. I'm just using what Math and Focus has already planned for us to do. The nice last thing I wanted to leave you with as a thought would be, maybe the end of your lesson here, your end of your screencast, you could leave students with a formative sort of exit slip. Because remember, this is an activity in Seesaw. So if you were to ask them at the end of this screencast, boys and girls, could you maybe think about all the learning we've just, you know, gone through today in this, you know, few minutes here in our screencast? And I'd love for you to go ahead and respond with what a fraction is. In your words, how would you describe what a fraction is? And what we're looking for is really just for them to say it's, you know, equal pieces within a shape, right? Something along those lines. But what I could do is ask them to put that in the response. So I could conclude my lesson with that, and that could start a feedback loop with students. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to hit done. And notice now I have the 2 pages of my instruction. Since I'm done, I'm going to hit that green check. It's going to process, save it. You'll notice under the student template, it says item attached. What I would maybe want them to do, I'm just going to take this off, is I'm going to hit save. And then you could, it says down here, you could contribute it to the Seesaw library. A really nice thing that is going to support your team, even in the future, is you would want to add this to a collection. Since this is for fractions, I had already made a collection for 2nd grade fractions. So I would just click on that, and then it gets automatically saved to that. That way I could, you know, share that out with my teammates later. But another nice feature is that if you go to collection, add a collection, maybe you haven't ever made a collection, the way you would do that is hit the blue plus in the upper right and type in the name of it and hit save. Okay, so now I would just go ahead and assign to my class. I'm just using a temporary class, blended learning, and now all of the students would have access to it. So if I were to hit done, if I can get out of this, sorry, would have done, if I hit my activities, like versus the journal, if I go to activities, the very top thing is the screencast I just gave. Notice it says what we wanted to. Click on the video to hear today's lesson. If I were to hit add response, granted I don't have a whole roster, if I was that sample student, it's going to prepare the video, and then I would just hit play. I'm just going to reset. All right, good morning, boys and girls. And I would, you know, I could tap on that if they wanted to, and then I would hit check mark to show I was done. And then now that the student has, type out of that. Now that the student has viewed the lesson, they would go down to that comment box and leave that response on what I had asked them to do at the conclusion, where define what a fraction means in your own words. So maybe I'll say, you know, a fraction is a shape cut in, not dog, cut up into equal pieces. So, you know, I mean, it's close, it's not perfect, but they would just hit post. And now what I'm able to do as a teacher is I would go back and take a look at that, and I could go back and add to and just kind of start a feedback loop like, oh, that's good. A fraction doesn't maybe always refer to a shape. Like it is equal pieces, but maybe we could change our thinking and broaden it to, you know, some new concepts as far as just taking anything and cutting it into equal pieces. And maybe I could even loop that into the next screencast, because I'm noticing a lot of kids are maybe looking at it more as a definition of a shape versus the equal pieces. However that might work out for you. But in essence, hopefully this has given you an understanding on how you can just use the blank screen in Seesaw, creating and using the activity feature to push out core instruction.